So I chose to read Betty Before X by Eliza Chavez and Renee Watson. It's about an 11-year-old girl named Betty and her life in Detroit in 1945. This was a time that was particularly hard for African Americans with a lot of racism. And Betty finds a passion in activism through her church and by listening to speakers like Paul Robeson and Thurgood Marshall. She also begins volunteering for an organization called Housewives League, and it supports Black-owned businesses. She then goes on to become known as a civil rights icon named Dr. Betty Chavez, and she goes on to marry Malcolm X. So I chose to read Betty Before X because I grew up in a town with very little racial diversity, and I don't feel it was something that we were educated much on in school. I think that lack of education and awareness led to less empathy and just not being knowledgeable about other cultures and the struggles that other people face. So I plan to teach in around my hometown, and I want to encourage inclusion, empathy, kindness, compassion, respect, and love for all people regardless of race. I think to do that, you first need to start with education and awareness of the history and hardships of minorities, and that includes African Americans especially. I believe that even though we weren't there, we can't do anything about the events that happened in the past, that understanding what happened, how it happened, how we got to a point where things like racial segregation and racism and lynching and all of the things that happened, how that was acceptable, that's how we move forward in the future and make sure that none of that ever happens again. I would like to especially use this book to get my students to think about, what if this were them? What if this was their family? What if we lived at that time? What would we do? Would we be brave enough, like Betty, to be an activist and stand up for it? Would we just go along with the crowd? Would we just accept it? I think that's really important too, to examine yourself and what you value and what you would be willing to do to stand up for yourself and your family.